The dust of the Arizona Territory in the late 1870s was a fine, red powder that coated everything. It worked its way into the seams of canvas wagon tilts, into the mechanisms of new repeating rifles, and into the lungs of men and beasts. The dry season had stretched its legs and refused to stand, leaving the high plains baked brittle, afternoons shattered with heat, forcing life into the slivers of shade cast by rock and juniper. Nights were a sudden shock of cold, a reminder that the land was unforgiving on all terms. Along the worn groove of the Santa Fe Trail, progress was measured in iron rails and telegraph poles, stalking each other west, where the trail crossed the dusty ribbon of the Rio Puerco. The settlement of La Paloma huddled. It was less a town than a necessary stop, a collection of adobe, slapped mud, and raw lumber. Its heart was the station itself, a combination post office, saloon, and general store run by Rosa Alvarez. La Paloma was a crossroads for news, rumor, and whiskey. Eliza Hart sat at a small table in the corner of the cantina, the coolest spot available, mending a tear in a heavy canvas mail sack. She was 25 years old, orphaned by war and cholera, and she carried her few possessions in a sturdy wagon parked outside. Among them, her heavy camera and portable darkroom, the tools of her trade. Her other trade, sewing, was the more reliable one. Her stitches were small, neat, and brutally strong. She worked with quiet focus, her brown hair pulled back tight, her calico dress clean but faded. There was nothing remarkable about her, and she preferred it that way. Eliza Hart was not fancy. She dreamed of a small shop, a place with thick walls to keep out the heat and a sturdy sign that said simply, Hart Sewing and Portraits, a place of peace. The cantina smelled of stale beer, tallow grease, and the sharp tang of Rosa's chili stew. Rosa polished glasses behind the thick plank bar, her movements quick and efficient. She was a fortress of a woman who had seen too much to be surprised by anything. Her little sister, Elsie, a child of about 6, played on the floor with wooden clothespins, arranging them into a corral. They say he hit the railroad supply wagon. A freighter mumbled into his cup, his voice gritty with road dust. Killed the guard, left his mark. Rosa paused her polishing. What mark? The hawk sign, the man said, lowering his voice. Scratched right onto the poor fellow's chest. It's him, that Apache devil, Coanez. Eliza's needle stopped. She kept her eyes on her work. The name hung in the air, heavier than the heat. Coanez, the hawk shadow. To the railroad men and the settlers pushing west, he was an outlaw, a ghost who struck from the sun-baked rocks and vanished. He is ND, Rosa said quietly, not looking up from her glass. His people have been here since the beginning. He is a problem, the freighter shot back, and Judge Beckett aims to solve it. The railroad has to get through. That is progress. Eliza drew the thread tight, knotted it, and bit it clean. The railroad, Judge Silas Beckett. The two names had become one in the territory. Beckett was a landowner, an investor, and the circuit judge. He owned the bank, held the mortgage on half the businesses, and his rail company. Beckett Rail and Ore had a government grant to lay tracks straight through the Wounded Spring Valley, a valley the Apache considered sacred. A pair of spurs jingled, and Deputy Amos Pike pushed through the swinging doors, blinking as his eyes adjusted from the white glare outside. He was a young man, earnest and overwhelmed, with a kind face that was ill-suited for the hardness of his job. Afternoon, Miss Rosa, Miss Hart, he said, touching the brim of his hat. Elsie ran to him, and he lifted her easily, settling her on his hip. Amos, Rosa greeted him, her expression unreadable. You look tired. It's this business with the supply wagon. Amos sighed, accepting a glass of water. The whole town is stirred up. Judge Beckett is demanding the army. And the proof, Rosa asked, leaning on the bar, the proof it was Coanez. The hawk sign, Amos said, looking uncomfortable. Same as the others? It has to be him. Eliza folded the mended sack. She had seen the mark. Weeks ago, a prospector had been found in a dry wash, and Amos had brought the body back. The mark was crude, a V with 2 dots for eyes. Nothing like the elegant, soaring hawks she watched circle the mesas. It looked forced. It looked fake. Miles away, in the high canyons that bled into the Wounded Spring Valley, Coanez watched a pair of golden eagles hunt. He was 28, built of lean muscle and patience. He moved with a silence that had earned him his name. He was not an outlaw. He was a guardian. He and his scouts patrolled the old trails, protecting the hidden spring that kept his people alive through the dry season. The spring Silas Beckett wanted to choke with mine tailings and railroad ties. His cousin, Naichi, approached, his moccasins making no sound on the rock. Naichi was fire to Koa's water. "The wagons come again," Naichi said, his voice tight. "They carry more iron. They poison the water with their camps. We should strike. We should burn them." "We protect," Koa said, his voice low. "We do not start a war we cannot finish. The railroad is a snake, but the snake does not see us yet. Not truly." "It sees a ghost," Naichi spat. "It sees the hawk shadow they blame for every lost mule and sour stomach. They blame us for the attack on the supply wagon." "That was not our work," Koa said. He had seen the site. The tracks were from shod horses, not ponies. The attackers had left the sign, the ugly scratch, to point the finger. Beckett's men do his dirty work, then use his law to blame us. "Words," Naichi said. "Gray Dove asks for water. You give her words." "Gray Dove asks for wisdom," Koa corrected him, his gaze fixed on the valley. "She asks for our people to survive. War will not bring survival, not this time." He knew Beckett. The judge did not just want the land. He wanted the Apache gone, either dead or driven so far south they would never return. He needed an excuse, and Koa was that excuse. Back in La Paloma, Deputy Amos Pike unrolled a sheet of paper on the bar. It was a wanted poster, hastily printed. The image on it was a smudge, a dark shape on a horse, copied from a damaged photograph taken by a surveyor months ago. "Judge Beckett is offering $500, Amos announced to the room, "for the capture of the man called Hawk Shadow, dead or alive." The cantina went silent. $500 was a fortune. It was enough to make a man hunt anything. Eliza looked at the poster. The image was useless, blurry, more shadow than man. It could be anyone. That was the point. A man would be hunting a rumor. Amos turned to her, his expression apologetic. "Miss Hart, that's partly why I came. The town council, well, Judge Beckett, really, they know you're skilled with that camera box. They were wondering if you could improve this." He held out the blurry photograph the poster was based on. "They want you to re-photograph it, make it sharper, clearer. For the posters, they'll pay $20. $20. Eliza's heart beat a little faster. That was 2 months' savings. It was shelves for the shop. It was glass for a proper window. She looked from the photograph to Rosa. Rosa's face was stone. Little Elsie had stopped playing and was watching the adults, her dark eyes wide. "Taking that job," Rosa said, her voice just for Eliza, "is like loading the rifle for them." Eliza knew it. To make the shadow clearer was to give the hatred a target. It was to take a rumor and give it a face, even a blurry one. It was to help them hunt a man who might be innocent. A man Rosa called ND. A man whose land was being stolen by the same judge offering the money. But $20 was $20. And she was so tired of mending other people's canvas. She was tired of the dust, tired of being alone. Tired of a dream that felt as distant as the cool mountains. "I'm just a photographer." "Amos," she said softly, her hand reaching for the damaged print. "I capture what's there. I cannot make a guilty man from a shadow. We just need it clearer." "Miss Hart," Amos said, relieved. "Whatever you can do." She took the photograph. It felt heavy in her hand, heavy with more than just the cardstock it was printed on. She was seeing, but she was not sure what she was supposed to be looking at. Was it justice, or was it just a rumor about to be printed, published, and nailed to every tree between here and Santa Fe? Coanez stood on the ridge as the sun bled into the western mesas. He watched the small curl of smoke from La Paloma. He had seen the girl with the camera box before, near the river. She was quiet. She did not belong to the railroad, or the town. She moved like someone who was watching, not just looking. He had seen her stop to give water to an old dog tied outside the cantina. He did not know that his life, the life of his people, and the fate of the wounded spring was about to rest on the images she could capture and the truth she could find in the silver and the glass. Eliza slipped the photograph into her satchel. She would do the job. She had to. She needed the money. She would take the blurry shadow and make it a clearer shadow. That was all. She was just a seamstress, just a photographer. She was not fancy. She was just trying to survive. The weight of the coming conflict, the clash of iron and tradition, of law and justice, settled over the small cantina like the coming chill of the desert night. The crate of collodion and silver nitrate was her livelihood, and it was heavy. Eliza Hart steadied the box in the back of the wagon as the mule's hooves struck the wooden planks of the Arroyo Bridge. The sound was hollow, a drumbeat over the dry wash below. Deputy Amos Pike guided the team, his face already streaked with sweat though the morning was barely gone. They were taking the old cut-off road, a rough track that saved half a day, to deliver a newly mended cavalry guidon to a patrol camped in the western mesas. Eliza had brought her equipment, hoping to capture a landscape image if the light was good. The bridge was a rickety spine of sun-bleached lumber spanning a wide, rocky canyon. It was a known weak point, a bottleneck in the high desert. The first shot was a sharp crack, splintering the wagon's side panel. A second whined past Amos's ear. "Ambush!" Amos yelled, fighting the reins as the mules panicked, threatening to pull the wagon sideways off the bridge. 6 riders spurred their horses from a cluster of sandstone hoodoos. They wore dusty coats and checkered bandanas pulled high over their noses. They were loud, screaming and firing into the air, a performance of chaos. One of them, a broad-shouldered man on a bay horse, rode close to the wagon, pulled a piece of white chalk from his pocket, and crudely drew the V-shaped hawk sign on the canvas tilt. Eliza grabbed the wagon rail, her knuckles white. She looked for cover, but there was none, just open planks and a long drop to the rocks. Then, a different sound, a single, powerful rifle report from the cliffs above the bridge. It echoed, deep and authoritative. One of the attacker's rifles flew from his hands, spinning into the air. A second shot, and another attacker's hat was plucked from his head. The raiders stopped their yelling. They looked up, confused, searching the rocks. A figure stood on a high ledge, silhouetted against the bright sky. He was too far to see clearly, but he did not move like the attackers. He was still precise. He fired again, the bullet kicking up dust at the feet of the leader's horse. It was a warning, a command. The attackers, clearly not paid to fight a skilled marksman, broke formation. They were disorganized, frightened. "He's setting fire to the bridge," Amos shouted. The leader of the fake raiders, the man with the chalk, had pulled a torch from his saddlebag. He tossed it onto the dry support beams beneath the bridge. The old, creosote-soaked wood caught instantly. Oily black smoke boiled up. The attackers turned their horses and fled, galloping back the way they had come, disappearing into the maze of rocks. The bridge groaned, the mules screamed. Pulling backward from the wall of smoke, the wagon shuddered, its wheels catching in the burning planks. "We have to unhitch," Amos yelled, jumping down to cut the traces. The planks beneath Eliza's feet gave way with a sound of tearing wood. She cried out, grabbing for the wagon, but it was sliding. She fell. Not into the canyon, but into the collapsing structure of the bridge. Her boot caught between 2 splintering beams, trapping her leg. The heavy wagon slid, its wheel agonizingly close to her body. Smoke burned her eyes, and the heat was intense. Amos was trapped on the other side, wrestling with the terrified mules. He could not reach her. Suddenly, a man was beside her. He had not come from the rocks. He had come from the smoke, moving with an unnerving silence. Before she could process his arrival, his hands were on her. They were not gentle, but they were certain. He grabbed her by the arms, pulled her leg free with a single, powerful wrench, and dragged her clear of the wagon. He half carried, half threw her onto the solid ground of the bank. Just as the main section of the bridge and her wagon crashed into the dry arroyo below, Eliza landed hard on the packed dirt. Coughing, her ankles screaming in protest, she looked up. He stood over her for only a second. Coanez, the hawk shadow. It had to be. He was lean, his face stark and focused. His eyes were not cruel, but they were hard, assessing her in an instant. He wore no paint, only simple buckskins and a knife on his belt. He was not the devil from the rumors. He was a man. Then, as silently as he appeared, he was gone. He did not run. He moved into the junipers and vanished. Eliza's breath hitched. She was alive. Her camera, her chemicals, her glass plates, all were a smoking ruin in the canyon. Her entire life, gone. Amos finally cut the last mule free and ran to her side. He helped her up, his hands shaking. "Are you hurt, Miss Hart?" She shook her head, unable to speak, brushing ash from her skirt. Her gaze was fixed on the wreckage. "That was him," Amos said, his voice awed and terrified. "Hawk Shadow! He attacked us! He burned the bridge!" Eliza looked from the canyon to the ridge where the shots had come from. She found her voice, though it was rough. "No, he did not attack us. He saved us." What Amos looked confused. "But the fire, the riders." "The riders," Eliza said, her mind working fast, her photographer's eye replaying the scene. "They were not Apache. They were white men." "You could not know that, Miss Hart. They wore masks." "Their rifles," she said, thinking aloud. "They were new." Henry repeaters. "All of them. And the man who set the fire. His coat. I saw it when he turned." She remembered the brief glimpse of a stencil on the canvas duster. A circle. It had a mark. From the Beckett warehouse. Beckett rail and oar. Amos stared at her, his simple, honest face struggling to understand. But why would Beckett's men attack us? Why would they leave the hawk sign? Eliza did not answer. She looked down at the ground where Coanez had pulled her. Something lay in the dust, half covered by a splintered piece of wood. It was a thick leather envelope, dropped by the lead attacker in his haste. It was sealed with dark red wax. Stamped into the wax was the unmistakable logo B-R-O. Her hand moved faster than her thoughts. She bent down, pretending to check her boot, and her fingers closed around the envelope. She slipped it into the deep pocket of her apron. It felt heavy, dangerous. "He saved us," she said again, this time with certainty. "The man on the ridge. He drove them off." Amos looked at the smoking bridge, then at the empty ridge. But it was Hawk Shadow. Everyone knows he is the one attacking the railroad. It must have been two rival gangs. Yes, that is it. They were fighting over the plunder. Eliza knew that was not it. She said nothing. The proof was in her pocket, a burning weight against her leg. The walk back to La Paloma was 5 miles of dust and painful silence. Eliza leaned on Amos, favoring her ankle. By the time they reached the edge of town, the news, carried by some unseen grapevine, had already arrived. The Arroyo Bridge was down. The town sheriff, a hard man named Gable, who owed his badge to Judge Beckett, met them at the livery. The Apache finally did it. Gable said it was not a question. Burn the bridge. It was not that simple. "Sheriff," Amos began, looking troubled. "There were these other riders, and then Hawk Shadow. He was shooting at them." Gable cut him off, his eyes cold. "Do not confuse the issue. Deputy, the judge wants a clear report. The Apache, known as Hawk Shadow, leading a war party, destroyed railroad property. That is the report you will write. Is that understood?" Amos looked at the ground. He looked at Eliza. He was young, and he was caught. He gave a short, unhappy nod. Eliza watched them walk to the office. The lie was already setting like mortar. Rosa came out of the cantina, wiping her hands on her apron. She saw Eliza's face, the ashes on her dress, and the empty space where her wagon should be. Rosa's expression hardened. "Come inside, Mia. Let me look at that ankle." Inside, Eliza sat at her usual table, the smell of stew suddenly making her stomach turn. She watched through the window as Amos sat at his desk, pen in hand, writing the lie that would send hunters and soldiers into the hills, the lie that would get Coanez killed. Her hand rested on her apron. The envelope. She could walk over there, give it to Amos, give it to the sheriff. She could show them the Beckett seal. But she remembered the faces of the attackers, the new rifles. They were not common thieves. They were hired. They had failed to burn the bridge without witnesses, and they had lost the envelope. They would be looking for it. The moment she produced it, she would become a target, a loose end. Silas Beckett was the law. Who would protect a not-fancy seamstress from the law? She said nothing. She watched Amos finish the report and hand it to the sheriff. From the high rocks, Koa watched. He had seen the whole thing. He saw the woman's eyes, sharp and quick. Noticed the rifles. He saw her notice the coat. He saw her small, fast hand secure the envelope. He saw her keep it. He watched her limp back to the town, her livelihood destroyed. But she had not cried. She had watched the deputy and the sheriff. She had kept the secret. This woman, he thought, was not what she seemed. She had looked straight at the truth, and she had hidden it. The ashes of the Arroyo Bridge fire settled, but the temper of La Paloma rose. Judge Silas Beckett rode into town not on his usual circuit buggy, but at the head of a line of hard men, each carrying new repeating rifles. He was a man whose considerable bulk was made of equal parts ambition and impatience. He stood on the porch of the saloon, the boards groaning beneath his polished boots, and addressed the small crowd of freighters, merchants, and nervous settlers. He spoke of progress, a word he used often. He painted a picture of a shining future, of engines and commerce, a civilized land. And then he painted the picture of the savage, the shadow that stood in the way of that future. He named Coanez. He called the bridge burning an act of war. He announced the reward for the capture of the Hawk Shadow was now $1,000. $1,000. The sum silenced the street. It was enough money to change a man's life, or to end it. After the speech, Beckett found Eliza Hart. She was sweeping the wooden walkway in front of Rosa's cantina, her movement stiff from her fall. Her worldly possessions were now a single carpet bag. Beckett removed his hat, a gesture of politeness that felt like a threat. He expressed his deepest sympathies for her loss. The wagon, the camera, a tragedy. He said it was a loss for the whole community. Her skills, he said, were needed now more than ever. He told her the railroad had resources. He had, in fact, an associate's photographic equipment stored in a secure office, a newer model, finer lenses. He offered it to her, not as a gift, but as a loan, and with it, a job. The town council, he explained, needed a proper wanted poster. The blurry print they had was insufficient. He wanted her to use the new camera to reproduce the old image, to sharpen it, to give the law a clear target. The pay would be $50, enough to buy a new wagon and then some. Eliza looked at the dust. She felt the weight of the envelope in her apron pocket. She knew she was being offered a bribe, a payment to join the side of the lie, but she also saw the camera, the lenses, a tool. She told him she would do it. The office was a small, hot room behind the sheriff's station. The camera was indeed new, a heavy mahogany box with a gleaming brass lens. Cole Maddox, Beckett's quiet, watchful enforcer, brought her the items, the blurry original photograph of the man on the horse, and a box of fresh glass plates. Maddox lingered. He was a man who seemed to take up all the air in a room, his eyes flat and pale. He watched her set up the tripod, mixed the chemicals in the small tent she would use as a portable darkroom. His presence was an itch between her shoulder blades. As she was preparing the first plate, Maddox interrupted. He said the judge also needed a copy made of a survey map, claiming it was urgent. He unrolled a large, detailed drawing of the wounded Spring Valley on her small work table, covering the photograph. He pointed to coordinates, asked her questions she could not answer. It was a distraction, clumsy but effective. She spent minutes focused on the map, trying to understand what he wanted. He finally seemed satisfied, rolled up the map, and left the room. Eliza turned back to her work. She focused the lens on the photograph Maddox had left for her. She coated her plate with the sticky, sweet-smelling collodion, sensitized it in the silver nitrate bath, and made the exposure. She took the plate into the dark tent. The smell of ether and alcohol was sharp in the close space. She poured the developer. The image began to emerge, a ghost resolving into reality. Her breath caught. This was not the blurry shadow on the horse. This was a face, a portrait, clear, sharp, and angry. The man was looking directly at the lens. He was ND. She knew that, but it was not the man who had pulled her from the fire. She knew this face. She had seen him in La Paloma, trading furs, his movements quick and impatient, his eyes full of fire. It was the man Rosa had once pointed out, Nietzsche, Koa's cousin. They had swapped the photographs. Maddox, Beckett. They had not wanted her to clarify a shadow. They had wanted her to create a new target. They were not hunting a rumor. They were pointing a gun at a specific man. She understood the tactic instantly. Frame the hothead. Nietzsche was known to be proud and quick to anger. An insult like this, a bounty on his head, was not just an accusation. It was a fuse. They were trying to start a war. They were using her skill, her camera, to light it. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from a cold rage. She quickly fixed the image, washed it, and slipped the glass negative into her bag. She cleaned her equipment, her mind racing. She found Deputy Amos Pike sorting mail in the post office. She pulled him aside. Into the narrow alley between the saloon and the smithy, she spoke in a low, urgent voice. She told him they had deceived her. She told him they were framing an innocent man. She showed him the glass plate, holding it up to the sliver of blue sky. Amos saw the face and went pale. He recognized Nietzsche. He told her, his voice strained, that she must be quiet. She did not know what she was getting into. Eliza demanded he do something. He was the law. He looked away, his face a mask of misery. He told her he was the law, but Judge Beckett was the power. Sheriff Gable took his orders from the judge. If Amos presented this, he would be fired. Or worse, he was just one man. He told her, his eyes begging her to understand, that he could not help her. He told her to put the plate away, to pretend it never happened. Eliza left him there. She went back to the cantina. The stew was boiling, and Rosa was kneading dough, her hands strong and covered in flour. Little Elsie was asleep in the corner. Eliza told Rosa everything, the swap, the face, Nietzsche. Rosa did not stop kneading, but her rhythm became harder, faster. She looked at Eliza, her dark eyes clear and certain. She told Eliza that her life was now worthless to those men. She had seen the truth. She was a witness who could not be allowed to speak. Rosa told her to go. Now. She told her to take the horse, the fast gelding Rosa kept for emergencies, and ride south to Tucson. She could lose herself in the city. She told her that no shop, no $20, was worth her life. Eliza stood very still. She felt the cold glass of the negative in her bag. She felt the thick, stiff paper of the envelope in her pocket. Run! Yes, she had to run, but not south. If she ran south, the posters of Nietzsche would be printed by someone else. The war would start. Coanez would be hunted for a crime he did not commit, and Nietzsche would be hunted for one he had not even been accused of yet. And Beckett would win. The spring would be his. She made her choice. It was a hard, cold decision that settled in her bones. She told Rosa she was right. She had to leave. She went not to her room, but back to the sheriff's office. The small dark room was empty. Maddox and the judge were at the saloon. She worked quickly, her hands sure. She packed the new camera, the heavy mahogany box. She packed the lenses, the chemical bottles, the box of fresh plates, and her dark tent. She put the negative of Nietzsche, wrapped in cloth, at the bottom of the bag. She was stealing the very tools they had given her to create the lie. She loaded the supplies onto Rosa's gelding. Rosa watched, her face tight with worry. She pushed a canvas sack into Eliza's hands. It held water, jerky, and a small, heavy revolver. Rosa's eyes told her she knew Eliza was not going south. Eliza rode west, toward the high, broken country, toward Wounded Spring. She was not a horsewoman, and the saddle was hard. The sun was a hammer. She was terrified, but for the first time in her life, she was not just surviving. She was fighting. She pushed the horse for hours, following a dry wash that cut toward the mountains. The land was empty, hostile. She was a speck of movement in a vast, uncaring wilderness. Then the sky changed. The blue faded to a sick yellow, then a deep, angry red. A wall was building in the north, a churning cloud of dust that blotted out the sun, a dust storm. It hit her with the force of a train. The world vanished. The wind screamed. A physical weight that tried to peel her from the saddle. The air was not air, it was dirt, choking, blinding. The horse shied, turning its back to the blast, and Eliza lost her grip. She fell, landing hard on the sand. She could not breathe. She could not see. She crawled, dragging the heavy camera bag, trying to find shelter behind a pathetic mesquite bush. The wind stole her breath, filled her mouth and lungs with grit. She was going to die here, blind and alone. A hand clamped down on her arm. It was not a gentle hand. It was raw power. It lifted her, dragged her. She stumbled, unable to see, trusting the grip. She was pulled through the roaring darkness, into a narrow cleft between two high walls of rock. The sound of the wind changed from a scream to a howl, passing over their heads. The air was still thick, but the direct blast was gone. She slumped against the rock, coughing, her lungs aching. She wiped the mud from her eyes. He was there, Coanez. He was watching her, his body perfectly still. He, too, was coated in the fine red dust. He looked like a man carved from the sandstone itself. They were trapped. The space was barely wide enough for two people and her equipment. The storm raged outside, a wall of noise and fury. He said nothing. He just watched her. She had to break the silence. Her voice was a raw croak. She told him they were trying to frame him. His expression did not change. He replied, his voice low, that he knew this. She shook her head, coughing again. She told him he did not understand. It was not just the shadow anymore. They had a face. She fumbled in her bag, her fingers numb. She pulled out the glass plate. The negative. It was too dark to see well. She pulled out the print she had managed to make before she left. She held it out to him. He took it. Even in the dim red light, he saw the face. His stillness broke. His eyes flashed, a sudden, hot anger that startled her. He crushed the print in his fist. He knew his cousin. He knew what this meant. He said the name, Nietzsche. He looked at her. His eyes narrowed to slits. He asked her why. Why warn him? Why bring this to the man she was paid to help capture? Eliza took a ragged breath. She told him she was not fancy. She told him she was not brave. But she told him she would not be the person who helped a man like Beckett start a war. She reached into her apron, passed the revolver, and pulled out the thick, wax-sealed envelope. She told him she had found it at the bridge. She told him the attackers were not his people. She told him they had Beckett's mark. He took the envelope. He studied the seal in the fading light. He broke it. His eyes scanned the page inside. A manifest, a list of rifles, a payment note. He looked at her for a long time. The wind was beginning to lessen. He told her she was right. He had not attacked the wagons. He had not burned the bridge. He told her Beckett wanted the spring. Wounded spring. The water that kept his people alive. And he would kill anyone to get it. He told her that by bringing him this, she was no longer a settler. She was a target. Beckett's men would hunt her now. Eliza said she knew. She had the camera. She gestured to the heavy bag. Beckett's camera. She told him she could help. The lies worked because people saw the posters. She could make them see the truth. She could take pictures. Pictures of the real evidence. A new understanding passed between them. It was not friendship. It was a fragile, dangerous alignment. An alliance born of necessity and shared enemies. He told her she could not go back. La Paloma was death for her now. She would have to come with him. To Wounded Spring. It was the only place she was safe. And it was the only place she could find the truth she was looking for. He picked up her heavy camera bag as if it weighed nothing and motioned for her to follow him deeper into the canyon as the storm began to recede, leaving a new, red world in its wake. The canyon Koa Nez led her into was a crack in the earth, a passage hidden by shadow and sheer red rock. The path was not a path, it was a memory he carried, a map of stones and bent branches. Eliza Hart felt her exhaustion as a deep ache in her bones. She held tight to the nervous gelding Rosa Alvarez had given her, the heavy camera bag bumping her hip. They rode for what felt like hours, descending deeper into the high desert. Finally, the tight passage opened. They emerged into a hidden valley, a wide bowl protected by cliffs. It was not a lush paradise. It was a place of survival. A thin, clear creek trickled from a deep fissure in the rock, a wound in the stone that bled life. This was Wounded Spring. The water fed a patch of surprisingly green grass and a stand of old cottonwood trees, small shelters. Wickiups made of bent branches and cured hides were scattered near the trees. The quiet life of the camp stopped. Children paused their game with stones, their dark eyes wide and curious. Women looked up from their work, their hands still, holding baskets or scraping tools. They were Ndi, the people. Their faces were wary, not of Koa, but of the white woman he brought with him. Koa dismounted and spoke to them in their language. His voice was calm, the syllables flowing like water. He quieted their fears. He led Eliza toward the center of the camp, where an old woman sat on a blanket before a small, smokeless fire. Her face was a beautiful map of her life, every line a story. Her eyes were dark and clear, holding a wisdom that felt older than the rocks themselves. This was Grey Dove, the elder, the heart of this small band. Koa spoke to her for a long time. He told her of the bridge, the false posters, the swapped photograph of Nietzsche. He told her of the envelope. Grey Dove listened without moving, her gaze fixed not on Koa, but on Eliza. When he finished, there was a long silence. Then Grey Dove spoke. Her English was slow, measured, each word chosen with care. She told Eliza that the spring was their mother. It was the only water in this land during the long dry season. It was the place their stories began. She said the railroad man, Beckett, he did not see water. He saw only the yellow and silver metals in the rock. He wanted to break the rock. His digging, she said, would poison the spring, or the falling stones would bury it forever. He wanted to drive them away, to erase their presence, so his iron snake could crawl across their sacred land. Eliza felt the truth of the woman's words. She looked at the heavy camera case. She had to show them why she was here. She explained her craft. She did not capture souls. She said she captured truth. She told them of the fire, the loss of her wagon, but she said she had saved one thing. From the bottom of her pack, she pulled a heavy wooden box. It was scarred, one corner blackened by the fire. The lid was cracked. She had grabbed it from the dirt, an instinct, as she fled the burning wagon. It was a box of her best glass plates. She told them it had been thrown clear, but it had landed in the sun. The plates, she said, were probably sunburnt, fogged by the heat and light. But she had to try. She had to see what was on them. A look of confusion passed between Koa and the elder. Eliza realized her mistake. She had not taken pictures at the bridge. Her camera had been destroyed before she could... She corrected herself, feeling foolish. The plates were fresh, salvaged. What she needed was to make new images. She needed to photograph the evidence she carried, the envelope, the payment manifest. But first, she needed to show them the lie. She pulled out the glass negative of Naichi. Wrapped in her only spare cloth, she held it up. Koa's face tightened. He said this was the spark Beckett wanted, the spark to burn the world. Eliza had an idea. She asked Koa to take her to the site of the first attack, the supply wagon that had been hit weeks ago, the one they blamed him for. It was a risk. Leaving the valley exposed them, but Koa looked at the negative of his cousin, and he agreed. They rode hard, keeping to the low canyons. The wrecked supply wagon was still there, slumped on its side in a dry wash, picked clean by scavengers. Eliza worked with a desperate speed. The sun was high. She set up the mahogany camera, pulling the black focusing cloth over her head. The heat inside was suffocating. She smelled the dust, the chemicals, her own sweat. She focused the brass lens. She photographed the wagon. She photographed the ground, capturing the clear tracks of shod horses. They were nothing like the tracks of the unshod ponies the ND rode. Then she moved close. On the heavy canvas wagon tilt, the crude chalk mark was still visible. The V shape, the fake hawk sign. She photographed it. She had an idea. She asked Koa to place his carved knife on the canvas, next to the ugly chalk mark. A comparison. The elegance of his culture against the crudeness of the lie. She made the exposure. She had one plate left. Her eyes scanned the wreckage. She saw crates, broken open, ammunition boxes. She moved closer, her skirt catching on the splintered wood. And there, stenciled in black paint on the side of a box, Beckett rail and ore. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. This was the connection. She focused the lens. Her hands were shaking. She slid the plate holder into the camera. As she did, her eye caught a glint of metal in the dirt. A surveyor's ruler, dropped and forgotten. It was reflecting the afternoon sun. The light bounced off the metal, striking the iron band of the ammunition crate, reflected in the shiny metal. She could just make out a faint, distorted image of the numbers and markings on the ruler. Coordinates. She held her breath. She released the shutter. Back at Wounded Spring, she disappeared into her dark tent, the small space filled with the sharp smell of ether and developer. She poured the chemicals over the plates. The images bloomed in the red gloom, ghosts swimming into reality. The shod tracks, the fake sign next to Koa's knife, and the last one, the most powerful, the Beckett rail and ore stamp. Clear as day, and faint, but readable if you knew where to look. The reflected coordinates on the crate. Koa held the finished glass plates up to the sky. He studied each one. He saw the truth she had frozen in silver. He looked at her, and the suspicion in his eyes was gone, replaced by a new, cautious respect. In the days that followed, a quiet trust began to grow. He taught her the ways of his world. He did not teach her to fight, but to see. He showed her how to read the faint trails on the stone, how to find the path the wind took through the canyons. He pointed out the small, hardy plants that held water, and the ones whose fibers could be twisted into threads stronger than any she could buy. She showed him her world. She showed him how the glass lens could bend the sunlight, how the strange-smelling chemicals could capture a moment forever. He watched, fascinated. As she made a print, he called her work Catching Shadows. Their alliance was sealed, not with words, but with shared knowledge. The peace was broken when Naichi rode into camp. He was a storm of dust and fury. His horse lathered. He had been to La Paloma, He had seen the new wanted posters, the ones with his face. He threw his rifle to the ground. He screamed that his honor was gone. He was being hunted like an animal. He shouted for the warriors. He wanted to ride. He wanted to burn the town. He wanted blood. Koa stepped in front of his cousin. They were fire and stone. Koa's voice was low, but it cut through the anger of Naichi. He told him that to attack now was to walk into the trap. It would prove the lie. It would give Beckett the excuse he needed to bring the soldiers. Naichi spat on the ground. He called Koa weak. He accused him of trusting a white woman, a spy. Koa did not move. He reminded Naichi of his first duty, not to his pride, but to the people, to the spring. The argument was sharp, biting, the words a weapon between them. In the end, Naichi, shaking with rage, turned and stalked away. He did not ride. He stayed, but the camp was now divided. A young scout, a boy named Taza, returned a day later. He had been watching the town. Rosa had slipped him a copy of the Territory Enterprise. Eliza unfolded the paper. The headline was Large Apache Steel Weapons. The story, unsigned, claimed the Hawk Shadow and his band had attacked a freight shipment, stealing rifles and ammunition. Eliza looked from the newspaper to her photographs, the Beckett stamp on the ammo box. They had not stolen the weapons. Beckett was stockpiling them. He was arming his own men and using the newspaper to cover his tracks. She knew she could not hide any longer. The truth was useless if it stayed in the canyon. She told Koa her plan. The next day was market day in La Paloma. The one day the town was full of people from all over the territory. She would go. She would set up her camera, as if she were there to take portraits. But she would not be selling portraits. She would be showing them her prints. She would show them the shod tracks, the fake sign, the Beckett stamp. Koa told her it was a death sentence. Maddox would be there. Sheriff Gable. Eliza shook her head. Her fear was a cold knot in her stomach. But her resolve was harder. You had to force people to see. It was the only way. They moved under the cover of night. Koa led her to a rocky draw a mile from La Paloma, a place hidden from the main road. Rosa, trusting Eliza would come, had left a cache of supplies, water, food, and a large roll of canvas. The night before the market, Eliza worked. She stretched the canvas, creating a makeshift tent. She began making prints, her chemicals glowing faintly in the dark. Koa was gone, scouting the edges of the town. The attack was brutally fast. There was no sound, no warning. One moment she was alone. The next, Cole Maddox was standing in the opening of the tent, his revolver level with her heart. He kicked her tray of chemicals, the precious silver nitrate spilling into the dust. He raised his heavy boot, aiming to smash the mahogany camera. The judge sends his regards. Maddox sneered, his voice a low drawl. He wants his property back, and he wants the glass plates. A whisper of air. A sharp thud. The revolver flew from the hand of Maddox, spinning into the darkness. A rock, thrown with lethal precision. Koa emerged from the shadows like the shadow he was named for. He did not reach for his rifle. He crashed into Maddox. The two men went down, a silent, desperate struggle in the dust. Maddox was powerful, a brawler used to saloon fights. He shoved Koa back, breaking free, scrambling for his lost gun. Eliza did not think. She grabbed the heaviest thing she owned, the wooden tripod. She swung it with all her strength. The wood connected with the back of Maddox, a solid, sickening crack. He grunted, knocked off balance. "The book!" Koa yelled, fighting to his feet. Maddox had dropped a small, leather-bound journal. Eliza dove for it, her fingers closing around the cover. Maddox saw her. He roared and lunged, not for Koa, but for her. He grabbed her arm, his fingers biting into her skin. Koa was on him again. This time, Koa's knife was free. The blade was not aimed to kill. In a blur of motion, Koa pressed the flat of the wide blade against the side of the throat of Maddox. Everyone froze. Maddox could feel the cold steel. Koa was breathing hard. His body coiled. He could end the man's life. He did not. Slowly, he pushed Maddox back, letting him stand. Koa held the knife. Ready. Eliza held the journal, clutching it to her chest. Maddox, unarmed, looked at the knife, at the cold fury in the eyes of Koa. A slow, ugly smile spread across his face. "You will not do it. Shadow, it is not your way." He raised his hand slowly. He backed away, his eyes never leaving Koa. And then he turned and vanished into the night. Eliza was shaking so hard she could barely stand. Koa stood listening to the silence, making sure he was gone. They lit a small, shielded lantern. The book was a transport journal. Eliza's fingers, stained with chemicals, turned the pages. Shipments, dates, rifles, ammunition, payments. Then she saw the last entry. The date was for tomorrow, market day. The entry read, "Crates, dynamite, 6, destination Wounded Spring." The coordinates were listed, the same coordinates from her photograph. The purpose was written in a neat hand-ore clearing. Eliza looked at Koa. Her blood was ice. It was not ore clearing. Beckett was not just starting a war. He was planning to end it. He was going to blow the mouth of the spring, destroy their water, and erase the ND from the valley forever. The leather of the transport journal was still damp from Cole Maddox's pocket. In the dim, pre-dawn light, Eliza Hart and Koa Nez read the final entry again. 6 crates of dynamite, bound for the coordinates of Wounded Spring, scheduled for that very day. It was a death warrant. Koa closed the book. His face was granite. He told Eliza this was the end of the game. Beckett was no longer using rumors. He was using explosives. They had to stop the wagon, but they had to stop it in a way that left the evidence intact. To blow it up was to destroy the proof. To capture it was to start a war. They had to strand it. He needed help. He needed eyes in the town, and he needed a man of the law. However frightened, he scribbled 2 words on a piece of cured hide dynamite. North Ridge. He gave it to his youngest scout, Taza, who knew the secret ways in and out of La Paloma. Taza would get the message to Rosa Alvarez, and Rosa would get it to Deputy Amos Pike. Koa was betting on the conscience he had seen flickering in the young man's eyes. Then he went to find his cousin. Naichi was by the cold ashes of his fire, sharpening his knife, his anger a visible heat rising from him. Koa tossed the journal at his feet. Naichi read it. His head snapped up, his eyes blazing. He was ready to ride. Koa stopped him, his voice low and firm. He told Naichi he needed his skill with the rocks, not his thirst for blood. Their target was the wagon, not the men. They would stop it, but they would not kill, Naichi argued, his voice a low hiss, demanding vengeance for the insult of the posters. Koa reminded him that a single shot would bring the cavalry. A war would doom the spring, even if they won the battle. Naichi finally, reluctantly, agreed. He would help, but the rage still simmered. Eliza packed her chemicals and her camera. Koa told her she was to stay with Grey Dove. It was too dangerous. Eliza refused. She held up her heavy camera. This, she told him, was her rifle. Without a photograph of those crates, with the serial numbers, the journal was just a book, their word against Beckett's. They needed an image. Her quiet, stubborn resolve met his, and he relented. They met Amos Pike in a gully 2 miles north of the town. The deputy was on foot, his face pale and sick with fear, but he was there. He carried his service revolver and a small notebook and pencil. He told them Rosa had given him the message, that he had slipped away, pretending to check on a strayed horse. He looked at Koa, then at Eliza, and said he was ready to do what was right. The 4 of them, Koa leading, Eliza and Amos struggling with the equipment, and Naichi scouting the rear. His presence, a dark, unhappy shadow, began the climb. The temporary rail line Beckett had laid for his ore cart snaked through a deep arroyo, a natural trap. The plan was to create a rock slide, just large enough to block the tracks. but not large enough to detonate the cargo. They climbed in the dark, the rocks cold and sharp beneath their hands. They found their position as the sky in the east began to lighten, a faint gray promise of morning. They were high on the canyon wall, hidden by a jumble of sandstone. Then the weather turned, the stars vanished. A cold wind began to whip through the canyon, moaning, carrying the smell of ozone. And then, impossible for this late in the dry season, it began to rain. It was not a gentle shower. It was a cold, driving deluge. The wind threw sheets of water at them, and in minutes they were soaked to the bone. The rocks became treacherous, slick with a fine mud. Below them, the dry arroyo began to run with water, a small stream that was rapidly becoming a brown, churning torrent. "We must move higher," Koa yelled over the wind. "This gully will flash." They scrambled for a better position, their hands numb, their feet slipping. Eliza clutched her wooden case of chemicals and glass plates. It held her last supplies, her only way to capture the truth. Her boot slipped on the wet granite. She stumbled forward, her balance gone. The heavy box flew from her grasp. She cried out, lunging for it, but it was gone. Sliding, tumbling down the slick rock face, heading straight for the rising, muddy water below. Koa did not hesitate. He leaped past her, descending the rock in 2 reckless bounds. He threw himself forward, catching the box with one hand, his body slamming against the rock wall. His other hand, his right hand, was wedged between the case and a sharp edge of granite, taking the full, crushing impact of the heavy box. He stopped the fall. The chemicals were safe. He climbed back up to her, his face a mask of pain, but his voice was level. "I have it." He handed her the box. The rain was a solid wall of water now. "In here," Koa commanded, pulling Eliza toward a wide, shallow overhang, a cave carved by ancient winds. They huddled inside. Amos and Naichi pressed against the back wall, all animosity forgotten in the face of the storm. The rain fell in a curtain just inches from their feet. They were trapped, but they were safe. Eliza lit a small, shielded lantern. The flickering light illuminated the small space. She saw Koa's hand. He was trying to hide it, but she saw the blood welling up. "Let me see," she said. "It is nothing," he said, his voice tight. "It is not nothing," she insisted, her own voice sharp. "Give it to me." He relented. She took his hand. It was a mess. The skin was torn, the knuckles raw and bleeding, the back of it already bruising from the crush. It was caked in mud and grit. She unslung her satchel. Her hands, stained with silver nitrate, were surprisingly steady. She took out a canteen of clean water and a roll of clean cotton cloth she kept for polishing her glass plates. She poured the water, washing the wound, her touch as light as she could make it. He flinched, a sharp intake of breath, but he did not pull away. She worked in the dim lantern light, carefully picking the small stones from his skin. Amos watched them, silent. Naichi stared out at the rain, his face unreadable. Eliza finished cleaning it. She looked at his hand, then at his face. He was watching her, his eyes intense. The storm was a roar outside, but in the small cave, there was a profound silence. They were soaked, cold, and huddled close for warmth. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, just inches from hers. She could see the pulse beating in his throat. She took a fresh roll of cloth and began to bandage his hand, her movements economical and precise, the way she mended torn canvas. She wrapped his knuckles, his palm, his wrist, supporting the wound, making it tight. When she was finished, her fingers lingered on his wrist for a fraction of a second. She looked up and met his gaze. Neither of them spoke. It was a shared breath, a moment of absolute stillness. She finally released his hand and pulled a heavy wool blanket from her pack, the one she used to wrap her camera. She draped it over both their shoulders. "For the cold," she whispered. He nodded. The rain began to lessen as dawn approached. They knew the wagon would be delayed. The tracks surely washed out in places. They retreated to the hidden safety of Wounded Spring. That night, the mood in the ND camp was tense. The rain had stopped, but the air was cold. Grey Dove had given Eliza a space in her own wiki-up. Koa's hand was bandaged, a white slash in the firelight. Naichi was arguing again. He spoke of the rain as a sign. The wagon was delayed. It was their chance to gather all the warriors, to meet the dynamite with fire and arrows. He paced, his anger renewed. "Teach them a lesson," he said, his voice rising. "Show them ND steel." Koa stood up. The camp fell silent. He looked at his cousin. He looked at the faces of his people, the children, the women, the elders. He looked at Grey Dove. And finally, his gaze rested on Eliza. He spoke, his voice clear and carrying in the cold air. He spoke in the ND tongue, but his meaning was unmistakable. Grey Dove translated quietly for Eliza, her words following his. "I have made a vow to this spring," Koa said. "I have made a vow to our people. We will survive. But we will not survive by becoming the monsters they believe we are." Naichi speaks of lessons. The only lesson we will teach is that we are not murderers. We will not spill innocent blood. Not the blood of our families. Not the blood of the town. Not any. He held up his bandaged hand. "We will fight, but we will fight with truth. We will fight with justice, not with a vengeance." Eliza watched him, the firelight catching the sharp planes of his face. She understood something then, something profound. His strength was not in his silence, or his knife, or his ability to move like a shadow. His true strength was his discipline. It was the iron will to hold back, to choose the harder path, to seek justice when his entire being screamed for retribution. It was a strength she had never known. The dawn came, cold and clean. The scout returned. The ground had firmed up. The dynamite wagon was moving. They returned to the ridge. This time, the plan was flawless. The heavy, springless wagon, pulled by 6 mules and guarded by 4 of Beckett's men, clattered down the damp track. They were complacent, their rifles slung carelessly. "Now," Koa ordered. Naichi, positioned perfectly, used his rifle butt to dislodge the keystones of a loose overhang. It was not a violent explosion, but a precise unpeeling of the rock. A wall of mud and stone tumbled onto the tracks, 50 yards ahead of the wagon. The lead mules shied, screaming. The guards yelled, hauling on the brakes. The wagon ground to a halt. They were trapped. The gully was too narrow to turn. The men grabbed their rifles and jumped down, cursing the rain, the mud, and their luck. "Go!" Koa whispered. Eliza and Amos moved, half sliding, half crawling, until they were 30 yards from the wagon, hidden behind a cluster of boulders. Amos pulled out his notebook, his pencil flying as he copied the large, stenciled serial numbers on the crates. BRO explosives. Eliza set up her tripod. Her hands were numb, but they did not shake. She pulled the cloth over her head, focused, and slid the glass plate into the camera. Naichi, from his perch, drew a bead on the back of one of the guards. His finger tightened. It would be so easy. "Naichi." Koa's voice was a low warning, carried on the wind. "No, we have what we came for." Eliza released the shutter. The click of the mechanism sounded as loud as a gunshot in the quiet canyon. One of the guards spun around. "What was that? Who was there?" They raised their rifles, fanning out, staring into the bewildering maze of rocks. "Now, Eliza," Koa commanded. They did not run. They vanished. Eliza grabbed her camera, Amos his notebook. Koa and Naichi covered their retreat. They moved up the rocks, using a path the guards could not see, and were gone before the first nervous shot was fired, echoing harmlessly off the canyon walls. The railroad was a promise of civilization, and Judge Silas Beckett was its prophet. La Paloma was celebrating this promise. The night air, usually still and cold, was thick with the smells of roasting meat, spilled whiskey, and nervous excitement. Lanterns were strung on wires between the saloon and the land office, casting a yellow, unsteady light that made the dust dance. This was the Railroad Festival, a night to thank Judge Beckett for the iron rails he was forcing across the territory. On every flat surface, the new posters were visible. The face of Nietzsche, sharp and angry, was nailed to the livery wall, and beside it, the older, blurrier posters of the Hawk's Shadow, now with the reward crossed out and a new, larger sum written in $1,000. The town was walled in by these accusations. Beckett himself stood on a platform built from new, raw railroad ties. He was a large man, and the platform seemed to suit him, elevating him above the common dirt. His voice, amplified by his self-importance, boomed across the square. He spoke of progress, a word he repeated until it sounded like a prayer. He spoke of the future, a future of commerce, of schools, of churches, of law. He painted a picture of a land tamed, a wilderness civilized by the righteous application of industry and iron. And then he spoke of the shadow that stood against this light. He used the word savage 4 times, his voice dipping into a tone of shared grievance and fear. He spoke of the burned bridge. He spoke of the danger to their families, the threat to their prosperity. He named Koa Nez, the Hawk Shadow, as the embodiment of that threat. The crowd, a mix of settlers, freighters, and saloon regulars, muttered in agreement. They were afraid, and Beckett was giving their fear a name and a target. On the far edge of the square, near the dark alley by the smithy, a small canvas tent had been erected. It was unassuming. It looked like the temporary studio of a traveling photographer, set up to capture portraits of families wanting to commemorate the festival. Rosa Alvarez stood at the flap, her arms crossed. She said nothing. She simply stood, a silent guardian, her presence a challenge to the festive air. Inside the tent, in the dim red light of a safe-light lantern, Eliza Hart worked. Her hands, stained dark by the silver nitrate, moved with practiced, economical motions. She was not preparing portraits. She was developing the truth. The smell of ether and collodion was sharp in the canvas enclosure. She had 2 large glass negatives. One was the ammunition crate, the Beckett Rail and Ore logo stenciled on its side. The surveyor's coordinates reflected faintly on its metal band. The other was the dynamite wagon, trapped in the mudslide, its own serial numbers clear as a signature. She had spent the last of her chemicals making these prints, large ones, the paper saturated and heavy. She worked with the knowledge that this was her only chance, her camera, her skill. This was her only weapon. She stepped out of the tent, letting the canvas flap fall. She held 2 wooden boards. Pinned to them were the large, damp prints, the images still fixing in the night air. She placed them on 2 sturdy easels, borrowed from Rosa. She adjusted a lantern, letting the light fall directly on the images. The music from the fiddler faltered. A few people, drifting from the edge of Beckett's speech, noticed the tent. They saw the photographs. They moved closer. Curious, a man squinted, pointing. "What is that is the judge's mark?" More people came. They left the platform and clustered around the easels, forming a small, silent half-circle. They saw the logo. They saw the words. Explosives. They looked from the photographs to the judge, their faces a mix of confusion and dawning suspicion. The whispers started, a sound like dry leaves skittering across the packed earth. Beckett stopped his speech. The silence pulled at him. He turned, his face darkening, and saw the crowd gathered at the photo tent. He saw his name, his logo, pinned up for all to see. He descended from the platform, his heavy bootsteps silencing the whispers. He pushed his way through the crowd, which parted for him like water. He stood before the easels. He looked at the ammunition crate. He looked at the dynamite wagon. He chuckled. It was a deep, dismissive sound. But Eliza, standing just feet away, saw the muscle jump in his jaw. "Well," Beckett boomed, turning to the crowd. "It seems we have an entertainer among us." He gestured at Eliza, his hand waving her away as something insignificant. A fabrication. A clever trick. That is what this is. We all know what shadows and light can do in the hands of a skilled trickster. He leaned in, peering at the print. It is forgery. This woman lost her wagon, and now she tries to swindle the very town that offered her safety. She is desperate. Perhaps she is even in league with the very savages who attacked her. He was good. He was twisting it, turning her into the criminal. The crowd wavered, caught between the evidence of their eyes and the authority of the man who owned their mortgages. It is not a fabrication. The voice was quiet, steady, and utterly terrified. But it was clear. Deputy Amos Pike stepped out from beside the tent. He was not in uniform. He was pale, but his eyes were resolved. In his hand, he held the small, leather-bound transport journal. Beckett's smile vanished. His eyes went flat and cold. "I have the transport journal," Amos said, his voice gaining strength. "Taken from Cole Maddox himself. It lists the shipments for the Beckett Rail and Ore Company." He opened the book. His hands were shaking, but his voice was not. He read the entry. 6 crates, dynamite, bound for Wounded Spring. Coordinates to match the canyon mouth. He then looked at the photograph of the dynamite wagon. He pointed to the stenciled numbers. And here, B are O explosives. Serial numbers beginning 324, 325, 326. He looked up, his gaze meeting Beckett's. The numbers in the journal match the numbers in the photograph. It is not a forgery. It is the truth. The crowd was a wall of stunned, absolute silence. The judge was exposed. The lie was broken. The silence was shattered by a gunshot. Cole Maddox, his right hand heavily bandaged, stood by the judge's platform. He held his revolver in his left hand. He was not aiming at Amos. He was aiming at the evidence. The bullet tore through the print of the dynamite wagon, ripping the truth in half. He fired again. At the other print, he raised the gun a third time, aiming for the tent, aiming for the glass negatives he knew must be inside. A second shot, a different sound, high and sharp, echoed from the darkness. It came from the roof of the saloon. Maddox's revolver exploded. It was not a figure of speech. The rifle bullet, fired with impossible precision, struck the metal of the gun. The cylinder shattered. A spray of metal and wood fragments. Maddox screamed, a high, thin sound, and collapsed. Clutching his ruined left hand, his other arm already useless. The square erupted. People screamed. They ran, shoving, knocking over the lanterns, plunging the square into a chaotic mix of light and shadow. "He is here," Beckett roared, his voice cutting through the panic. He pointed, not at Maddox, but at the roof of the saloon. The hawk shadow. "He is attacking the town. He is firing on us." In that instant, Beckett seized the narrative back. Coanez had revealed himself, not as an attacker, but as a protector. But in the chaos, the crowd only saw the rifle, the shadow, the violence. "Seize him!" Beckett yelled at Sheriff Gable. "Seize the woman! They are together! It is a conspiracy! They are attacking us!" Men from the crowd, caught in the fear, pulled their own revolvers. They looked at the roof, at the tent. They were a mob now. Their confusion turned to anger. "They are destroying the evidence," Eliza said, her voice low and desperate. To Amos, "Get the negatives," Amos ordered, pulling his own revolver and standing his ground, a lone man of the law facing a mob of his own making. Eliza dove into the tent. She grabbed the heavy wooden box that held her only proof, the original glass plates. When she came out, the men were surging toward her. They were yelling, their faces angry in the flickering light. But they stopped. A line of figures had emerged from the alley, blocking the path to the tent. It was Grey Dove. With her were 6 other ND women, and the children. They had come, silently, to watch the unfolding of the truth. They stood in a calm, unbreakable line. They held no weapons. Their faces were impassive. They were a human shield, an accusation of stillness against the mob's chaos. They did not look at the men. They looked at Eliza, Grey Dove, her face a map of ancient wisdom, met Eliza's eyes. She nodded, a small, deep motion. "Go," Grey Dove said, her voice clear. "Take the truth. We will hold the shadow." Eliza clutched the box of negatives to her chest. She looked at Rosa, who was standing by the tent, her face grim. "Elsie," Rosa said, her voice thick. "Take her with you. Keep her safe." Eliza turned and ran. She grabbed the small hand of Elsie, and together they vanished into the darkness behind the smithy, protected by the very people the town sought to destroy. Behind her, she heard the town tearing itself apart. She heard Beckett's voice, full of rage and newfound authority, ordering Sheriff Gable to seize the town hall, to lock down the roads. He was declaring a state of emergency. The truth had been shown, but the lie, for now, had won the night. The war had just begun. The alley was a canyon of man-made shadow, the smell of whiskey and fear still hanging in the air. Koa Nez dropped from the saloon roof into the darkness, landing with a silence that seemed impossible for a solid man. He found Eliza Hart crouched behind a stack of empty barrels, her arms wrapped around Rosa's small sister, Elsie. The child was not crying, her eyes just wide and dark in the gloom, taking in the world with a terrifying stillness. Eliza held the heavy box of glass negatives pressed against her chest, the other arm shielding the girl. Koa did not speak. He pointed. He led them, not back toward the high desert, but deeper into the maze of stables and sheds that bordered La Paloma, moving along the creek bed, using the shallow water to cover their tracks. They reached the hidden draw, the one where Cole Maddox had found her, where her small canvas tent was still hidden. The wind was picking up, a cold, unnatural blast that carried the smell of ozone. They were barely inside the tent, the flap secured. When the sky opened, it was not a rain, it was a deluge, a solid wall of water that hit the canvas with the sound of a drum roll. Then a roar. Thunder cracked directly overhead, a sharp, violent sound that made Elsie jump. Lightning flashed, illuminating the small tent in stark, millisecond flashes of white, showing their faces, pale and strained. Koa used the remaining dry blanket to wrap the child. He sat with her, murmuring a few words in his own language, his voice a low, calm rumble beneath the storm's fury. Elsie, exhausted by the night's terror, finally succumbed, her breathing evening out as she fell asleep in the shelter of his arm. Eliza watched them. Her body was a single, humming wire of cold and exhaustion. Her hands were shaking so hard she could barely unfasten her satchel. She pulled out her sewing kit, the small roll of oilcloth that held her needles and thread. Koa's shirt, the one he had worn for days, had a long, L-shaped tear near the shoulder, snagged on a roof shingle during his escape. She moved the single lantern, its light weak and yellow, and sat on the other side of the sleeping child. "Give it to me," she whispered, motioning to the shirt. He looked at her, then at the child, then back. He did not remove the shirt. "It is nothing." "It is a tear," she replied, her voice rough. "I mend things. It is what I do." He hesitated, then pulled the worn buckskin shirt over his head. The faint light caught the muscles of his back and shoulders, the old, pale lines of scars. He was lean, but there was a power in his stillness that seemed to fill the tent. He handed her the garment and sat, bare-chested in the cold, watching her. The wind howled, pressing the wet canvas inward. The rain was a deafening, solid sound. Eliza threaded the needle, but her fingers were numb, clumsy. The thread refused the eye. She bit her lip, frustrated, her whole body shaking. A tremor she could not control. It was the cold. It was the fear. It was the image of Maddox's exploding gun, the sound of the mob, the sight of Grey Dove standing firm. Koa reached across the sleeping child and took the needle and thread from her. His large, bandaged hand, the one he had injured saving her chemicals, was steady as he threaded it in one try. He handed it back to her. She took it, but she did not start. She looked at the needle, then at the sleeping child, then at him. The shaking did not stop. A single tear, hot and unexpected, traced a clean path through the grime on her cheek. She spoke, her voice so quiet it was almost lost in the storm, a confession, forced out of her by the cold and the dark. "I am not Fancy," she whispered. He watched her, his expression unreadable. "This is all I have ever been," she continued, her voice thick. "Someone who mends what others have torn, someone who takes pictures of shadows. I am plain. I am the woman who is useful until the real lady arrives." She thought of her life, of being an orphan, of never being chosen, of always being the one on the edge of the room. No one has ever looked at me and decided I was the one to choose." She bowed her head, ashamed of the sudden, raw honesty. She was the woman who saw the truth, but she had never felt seen herself. Koa was silent for a long time. The only sounds were the rain and the soft breathing of Elsie. Then he leaned forward. He took the shirt from her lap, letting it fall to the ground. He took the needle and the spool of thread from her hand and set them aside. His calloused fingers gently brushed the tear track from her cheek. His voice was as low as the storm, but it cut through it. "I do not know this word. Fancy. It sounds weak, like a curtain that tears in the wind." He held her gaze. His eyes were dark, and for the first time, she did not see a warrior. She saw a man. "You are not weak," he said. "You stand. You see the truth. You carry the truth." He looked at the box of negatives, then back at her. "You are not a shadow. You are the light that burns the shadow." He said the next words slowly, as if they were a new language he was teaching her. "You are my treasure." Eliza's breath caught. It was not a compliment. It felt like a pronouncement, a binding word. He reached for the knife at his belt, the one she had seen him use, the one that was part of him. He drew the blade from its sheath. She did not flinch, not this time. He did not offer her the blade. He turned it, offering her the handle. "I have no ring," he said, his voice flat, stating a fact. "My people do not give metal circles." He pointed to the base of the handle. Carved into the dark horn was a small, intricate shape, a hawk, its wings spread, flying over a mountain. "This was my father's mark. It is his father's mark. It is my name." He pushed the knife gently into her hand, closing her fingers around the grip. "This is my word. This is my choice. This is my forever. It means I protect you. It means you are my home." She stared at the knife, its weight solid and real in her trembling hand. It was the most beautiful, terrifying thing she had ever held. She looked up at him, her eyes finally clear. She did not know who moved first. Perhaps they both leaned across the small, sleeping form of the child. It was not a kiss. It was an embrace, solid and sure. His bare arms wrapped around her, pulling her against his chest. She buried her face in the curve of his neck, breathing in the scent of rain, wood smoke, and him. She felt his heart beating, a strong, steady rhythm against her ear, a counterpoint to the chaos of the storm. His hand, the bandaged one, came up to hold the back of her head, his fingers spreading through her damp hair. She was not cold. For the first time, she was not cold at all. She was held. She was steady. She was chosen. They stayed like that for a long time, two survivors in a canvas shell, while the world tried to tear itself apart outside. The embrace finally broke, slowly, reluctantly. The storm had begun to lessen. The thunder rolling away into the distance, the reality of their situation returned. "Beckett has the town," she said, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "He has the law. He has the guns. We are outlaws." "Yes," Koa said. He released her, but his gaze did not. "He has the town hall, but we have the truth." "It is not enough," Eliza said. She sat back, her mind clicking back into place. My photographs, they are not enough if we cannot show them to the right people. Amos is arrested. Rosa is trapped. Grey Dove, they will be driven out. We cannot fight his guns, Koa said. We must fight his power. His power, Eliza repeated, her mind working. His power comes from the railroad, but it also comes from the town, the men who follow him. She reached for the box of glass negatives. She pulled out the last one, the one she had not shown at the festival. Rosa, before the festival, she knew Beckett might try something. She held the glass plate up to the lantern. She got into his office. This is a photograph of his private pay ledger. Koa looked at the plate. It was a list of names. Names of men in town, Eliza said, her voice hard. Payments. For security. For surveying. For silence. Sheriff Gable's name is at the top. Koa understood. This was the true weapon, not the dynamite. This was the lever that would break the town away from Beckett. The journal that Amos read is in the town hall, Koa said, his mind moving to the tactical. It is locked in the sheriff's office. This ledger, the original book, must be there too. We have to get them, Eliza said. We have to get them out, and we have to get them to someone above Beckett. A federal marshal. The governor. He will have the office guarded. Koa said, Maddox, Gable, men who are on that list. If we fail, Eliza said, looking at the sleeping child, we are not just outlaws. We are murderers. We will hang, and no one will ever know what happened at Wounded Spring. We will not fail, Koa said. He took the knife from her hand. He did not sheath it. He slid it back into the scabbard on her belt, securing it. It stays with you until this is done. A small, impossible hope flickered in her chest. She looked at him, at the set of his jaw, the resolve in his eyes. When it is done, she said, the words a promise. We will go to the spring. He nodded, a small smile touching his lips for the first time. We will. I will need a sign for my shop, she murmured, testing the words. A sewing and photograph shop. We will make a sign, he said. Treasure and thread, she whispered, looking at the needle he had threaded for her, and the knife he had given her. He repeated the words, treasure and thread. The rain softened to a steady drip. The night was breaking. They had a plan. They had a promise, and they had one last, desperate chance before the sun rose. The tent was a fragile shell against the graying light of dawn. The storm had passed, leaving the air washed clean and cold. The ground a map of fresh mud. They had a plan, born of desperation and a shared, unbreakable will. Eliza Hart secured the heavy knife Koa Nez had given her to her own belt. It felt solid, a promise. She bundled the sleeping Elsie in the last dry blanket. They split, Eliza, carrying the child, slipped through the pre-dawn shadows of La Paloma, making for the back door of Rosa Alvarez's cantina. Koa and Naichi moved north, silent as the mist rising from the wet ground, circling wide toward the canyon and Wounded Spring. Their goal was not the town hall. It was the dynamite. Judge Silas Beckett, his authority challenged and his public image shattered, was a man cornered, and a cornered man is a desperate one. He knew the townsfolk were confused, angry, but still afraid. He had one last, brutal card to play. He had sent messengers, men loyal to his payroll, to Cole Maddox, who was still camped by the stranded, mud-locked dynamite wagon. The order was simple. The bridge was gone. The tracks were blocked, but the explosives were there. They were to drag the crates, mule by mule if necessary, to the mouth of Wounded Spring and finish the job. He would clear the land, as the Transport Journal stated, and claim it legally, burying the spring and the Apache claim under a ton of rock. He would create a fact on the ground that no ledger could dispute. Eliza found Rosa in the cantina's kitchen. The woman had not slept. Her eyes were red, but her face was hard. She took her sister, Elsie, holding her tight, her composure breaking for just a second. Eliza showed Rosa the glass negative, the pay ledger. He is paying them all. Rosa, Gable, the others. Rosa nodded grimly. They control the town, but they do not control the people. Not all of them. Eliza pointed out the window, toward the new, ugly water tower that stood near the center of the square. I need to get up there. I need to see the spring. It is 30 feet high. Rosa said, It is the only vantage point, Eliza replied. When the time comes, you have to make them all look west. Rosa grasped a long, tin speaking trumpet, the kind used to hail wagons on the trail. I will make them deaf with looking, she vowed. At the same time, Deputy Amos Pike, released from the holding cell by Rosa in the night's chaos, was moving through the livery and the stables. He was not a deputy now. He was just a man. He found 2 freighters and a blacksmith, men who had no love for Beckett's railroad and his high-handed ways. He showed them the transport journal. He did not have to argue. He handed them each a spare rifle. For the town, he said. They were his militia. High in the canyons, the sun was just touching the tops of the red mesas. Koa and Naichi lay flat on a ridge overlooking the mouth of Wounded Spring. Below them, Cole Maddox, his left hand a mass of crude bandages, was directing 4 other men. They had done it. The 6 heavy crates of dynamite were stacked neatly at the narrowest point of the canyon, just above the fissure where the water emerged. One of the men was carefully unwrapping the long, waxy fuses. Naichi drew his rifle. He sighted down the long barrel. His target was the center of Maddox's back. This was the man who had put his face on a poster. This was the man who had attacked Eliza, who had tried to smash her camera. This was the man who was about to destroy their home. It was justice, clean and simple, delivered at 1,000 yards. His finger curled around the trigger. A hand closed over the rifle's hammer, stopping it. Koa's hand. He did not look at his cousin. He was watching the men below. You gave your word, Koa said, his voice a low breath. He is an animal, Naichi hissed, his eyes still on the sight. He is killing our mother. Let me end this. This is not the end. This is the beginning. We promised. No blood, no vengeance. Koa's grip was iron. He pushed the rifle barrel down, toward the dirt. Justice, or we become him. Naiche's whole body trembled with the contained violence, the centuries of rage. He looked at Koa, his eyes burning. Then, slowly, he released the hammer. He lowered the rifle. The moment passed. In La Paloma, Eliza was climbing. The water tower ladder was wooden, slick with the night's rain. She had the heavy camera and the box of glass plates slung on her back. Each rung was an agony. The wind was stronger up here, trying to peel her from the structure. Below, the town was waking, stirring, confused. She heard shouting from the town hall, where Beckett's men were trying to restore order. She reached the narrow platform. She was exposed, a target for anyone who looked up, but her hands were steady. She set up the tripod. She focused the long brass lens. The distance was extreme, but the light was clear. She could see them. She could see the men. She could see the crates. She slid the first glass plate into the camera. She saw one of the men take a length of fuse and attach a cap. He was preparing the charge. Eliza made the exposure. The click of the shutter was lost in the wind. She pulled the plate, slid in another, her movements a desperate, mechanical prayer. See this. See this. Down in the square, Rosa Alvarez stepped onto the balcony of the saloon. She raised the tin trumpet to her lips. Her voice, metallic and huge, boomed across the town, silencing every argument. Beckett is a liar, she screamed. He is a murderer right now. This minute, his men are at Wounded Spring. They are blowing the spring. He is destroying our water to cover his crimes. Look west. Look to the spring. The town froze. Every face turned west. They could not see the men, but they knew the spring was there. Beckett, standing on the steps of the town hall, his face purple with rage, roared. "Arrest that woman, she is inciting a riot." But Amos Pike chose that moment. He and his 3 armed citizens rode into the square. "She is telling the truth," Amos shouted, holding the transport journal high. "I have the proof he is an outlaw." Maddox heard the shout. It was faint, carried on the wind, but he heard it. He saw the figures on the distant water tower. He knew he was out of time. "Light it," he screamed at his man. "Light it now." The man with the matches struck one. "Now," Amos yelled, spurring his horse, his small band charging from the town. "Now," Koa commanded, rising from the rocks. Amos and his men crashed into the small group at the spring just as the fuse sputtered. Amos threw himself from his horse, tackling the man with the match. The blacksmith swung his rifle butt, scattering the other guards. The fight was a desperate, clumsy brawl, but it was 4 against 5. Cole Maddox saw Nietzsche standing on the ridge, his rifle aimed not at him, but at the dynamite. Maddox scrambled for his revolver, but Amos was on him. The 2 men rolled in the mud. Amos, smaller but fueled by a righteous fury, slammed the transport journal against the side of Maddox's head. Maddox went limp. On his buggy, on a rise overlooking the scene, Judge Silas Beckett watched his empire disintegrate. He saw Amos, the fool, tying up his men. He saw the town, his town, running, not in fear, but in anger, streaming out of the streets toward the spring. He saw Eliza Hart on the water tower, a dark speck, her camera aimed at him like a cannon. He tore at the reins, whipping his horses, trying to turn the heavy buggy. He did not take the road. He cut across the open flat, a shortcut to the south. The horses hit the low ground, the place where the rain had pooled, and stopped dead, sinking to their knees. The buggy's wheels were swallowed instantly. The rich, black mud, the very land he sought to own, closed around his carriage and held it fast. He roared, lashing with his whip, but the horses only screamed and sank deeper. He was trapped. The townsfolk arrived. They were breathless, confused. They saw the scene. They saw the 6 crates of dynamite. They saw the long, unlit fuse. They saw Amos Pike, his face bruised, holding Cole Maddox by the collar. And they saw, 100 yards away, Judge Silas Beckett, the prophet of progress, a prisoner in a carriage of mud. One of Amos's men held up a small object, a block of wood. "Found this in the wagon," he said, his voice carrying in the sudden, awful silence. "In Maddox's saddlebag." He pressed it against a flat, muddy rock. When he pulled it away, it left a V shape, the crude sign of the hawk. The crowd looked from the stamp to the posters on their town hall. They understood. Into this silence, Coanez walked. He emerged from the rocks, his cousin Naichi a step behind him. He walked past the dynamite, past the bound guards, past Amos Pike. He stopped in the open, in front of the assembled, silent town. He was not the hawk shadow. He was a man. He held his rifle high, presenting it. Then he placed it gently on the ground. He unbuckled the belt that held his sheath and laid it on top of the rifle. He stood before them, his hands open, his palms up. Eliza, from her high perch, made one last exposure, not of the crime, but of the justice, the warrior, unarmed, placing his life and the life of his people into the hands of a town that had, until this moment, been his enemy. The silence at Wounded Spring was heavier than the damp air. It was a silence of profound, collective shock. The townsfolk of La Paloma stared at the crates of dynamite, then at the crude wooden stamp that had branded their fears, and then at the man who stood unarmed before them. Coanez, Judge Silas Beckett, trapped in his muddy carriage, had stopped shouting. He just sat, a prisoner of the very land he had tried to steal, his face the color of old ash. Into this quiet rode a man who wore a different kind of authority. He was a United States Marshal, lean and weathered. His jurisdiction not a town but the entire territory. He had been in the next county, investigating a payroll robbery, when a frantic telegraph message, sent by Rosa Alvarez hours before the festival, had reached him. The message spoke of a conspiracy, of murder, and of a town held hostage by its own judge. He had ridden all night. He did not ask questions. He observed. He saw the dynamite. He saw the bound guards. He saw the mud-trapped judge. He saw the unarmed Apache. And he saw Eliza Hart, her face smudged with chemicals, climbing down from the water tower, clutching a heavy wooden box. The hearing was held not in the town hall, which was still locked, but in the open air, in the middle of the square. The marshal sat at a table borrowed from Rosa's cantina, the entire population of La Paloma, and the entire band of ND from Wounded Spring stood as witnesses. Eliza Hart was the first to speak. She did not speak with passion. She spoke with a cold, quiet clarity. She set up her tripod, not with a camera, but with a frame, one by one. She placed her glass negatives in the frame, holding them up against the bright, clean sky. She showed them the lie, the angry, framed face of Naichi. She showed them the truth, the ammunition crate from the first attack, stamped with the Beckett rail and ore logo, the faint, reflected coordinates shining on its metal band. She showed them the conspiracy, the dynamite wagon, trapped in the mud, its serial numbers a perfect match for the transport journal Amos Pike now held. And finally, she showed them the motive, the pay ledger, a long list of names, a spiderweb of bribes that had bought the silence and loyalty of the town's most powerful men, starting with Sheriff Gable. Each plate of glass was a nail in Silas Beckett's coffin. When Amos read the corresponding entries from the transport journal and the ledger, his voice steady. It was done. The marshal, who had seen all manner of frontier evil, listened without expression. He looked at Beckett, then at Cole Maddox, whose ruined hands were bound in front of him. Beckett was arrested. Maddox was arrested. Sheriff Gable, his name read aloud from the ledger, tore the badge from his own chest and threw it in the dirt before the marshal could take it from him. He and 3 other men from the pay list were also taken into custody. The marshal's men, a detachment of federal deputies, took charge of the dynamite, placing it under guard. They put Beckett and his men in the very jail they had once controlled, to await the long wagon ride to the territorial capital and a federal trial. The marshal's final act was to place a notice on the bank, the land office, and the railroad depot by order of the United States government. All assets of the Beckett Rail and Ore Company were frozen, pending investigation. The iron grip of the judge was broken. That night, the town held a meeting. It was not at the town hall. It was in Rosa's cantina. The room was packed. Settlers, freighters, and ranchers stood shoulder to shoulder with ND warriors. It was the first time they had ever shared a roof in peace. Amos Pike stood up. He told the assembly that he had resigned as deputy. He could not, he said, represent a law that had been so easily twisted. But the town needed order. It needed truth. A rancher, a man who had lost grazing land to Beckett's schemes, spoke next. He proposed an agreement. The railroad would still come. Progress was a river that could not be turned, but it would not come through Wounded Spring. Gray Dove spoke then. Koa translated her words, his voice giving them weight in the crowded room. She said the spring was life, not just for the ND, but for the land itself. To poison it was to poison them all. They spent hours, their voices rising and falling. They argued. They feared. But for the first time, they listened. By morning, they had a compact. It was written by Amos on a clean sheet of paper. The Wounded Spring Valley would be protected, its water rights granted to the ND people in perpetuity, an agreement to be filed with the territorial governor. The railroad would be required to find a new path, to go around, and to pay compensation from its frozen assets to the ND for the damage already done. It was a piece of paper, but it was a start. As the meeting broke up, Naichi approached Koa. He stood before his cousin, his pride warring with a new, hard-won humility. He spoke in their own language. He said his anger had been a blindfold. He said Koa's way, The way of the patient stone was stronger than his, the way of the striking fire. He looked at Eliza, who stood nearby. He bowed his head to her. He said he was sorry. He had seen her as an enemy, but she had the heart of an ND warrior. She had fought for his honor when he was ready to throw it away. Before Eliza could respond, Grey Dove came to her. The old woman's eyes were kind. She held up a small, vibrant hank of blue thread, dyed with desert flowers. She did not give it to Eliza. Instead, she took Eliza's hand and, with a few deft movements, wove the thread into a small, intricate knot around her wrist. "In our way," Grey Dove said, her voice a soft rasp. "The blue thread is for the woman who keeps the home warm, the one who mends the tears in the blanket, the one who sees, you are a keeper of the home, Eliza Hart, our home." Eliza looked at the blue thread, a circle of color on her skin, stained with chemicals. She felt the heavy weight of the knife on her belt. She realized, no longer just passing through. In the following weeks, La Paloma found a new shape. Amos Pike did not leave. He took his small savings and opened an office. The sign was simple, Amos Pike, notary and public witness. He would be the man who read the contracts, who witnessed the signatures, who made sure the truth was written down, plain and clear, for everyone to see. Rosa's Cantina, La Paloma, became the town's true center. It was the post office, the meeting hall, the one place where a rancher and ND scout could sit at the same bar and drink coffee. The most visible change was at the sheriff's office. The new marshal, before he left, had one last piece of business. He walked over to the poster wall. He tore down the blurry image of the hawk's shadow. He tore down the angry, sharp face of Naichi. The bounty was gone. The lie was gone. Coanez was no longer an outlaw. The freighters, who now used the northern trail he patrolled, began to speak of him in a new way. They called him the guardian of the trail, the man who knew where the water was, the man who watched, not to raid, but to protect. Eliza Hart found a small, abandoned adobe building just off the main square. Its walls were thick, and it had a sturdy door. The town, in a gesture of gratitude, helped her repair the roof. One bright, clear morning, she hung a new, hand-painted wooden sign above the door. Koa had carved the wood. She had painted the letters. They were simple, neat, and strong. The sign read Treasure and Thread, Sewing and Photographs. The first project was not for a customer. It was for the spring. The compensation money had come, and the two communities decided how to use it. They worked together, ND hands and settler hands. Hauling stone and split lumber, they built a simple, sturdy filter box at the head of the spring, a structure to keep the water clean, to protect it from the dust and the animals. And the children, who did not understand borders, ran between the legs of the workers. Elsie, Rosa's sister, played a game with the ND boy, tossing stones into a circle. They laughed, their languages different, their game the same. One afternoon, Eliza took her camera to the spring. Koa was with her. Elsie followed, curious, her hand held tightly in Koa's. Eliza set up her dark tent. She showed Elsie the magic. She showed her the glass plate, the sticky collodion, the silver bath. She took a photograph, not of the landscape, but of Koa. She brought Elsie into the dark tent. In the dim, red light, she poured the developer over the glass plate. "Watch," she whispered. "Eliza, Koa," and Elsie all leaned in close. The image began to emerge, a ghost swimming out of the silver. It was Koa's face, not as the hawk shadow, but as he was, smiling, the sun in his eyes. Eliza looked down, reflected in the shallow chemical tray. Catching the red light was Elsie's face. She was not the terrified child hiding in the dark. She was rapt, her mouth open in a small circle of wonder. And then, as the image of Koa grew clearer, she broke into a wide, bright smile. Eliza looked at the smile in the tray. She was not just capturing a shadow. She was seeing a future. The dry season had broken. The first spring festival at Wounded Spring was not a celebration of survival, but of a new, shared life. The air, washed clean by the winter rains, was soft. The sun, setting low in the west, cast a light of deep, dusty gold across the canyon. It pooled in the valley, softening the red rock, making the new leaves on the cottonwood trees seem to glow. From the ND camp, clustered near the protected mouth of the spring, came the steady, rhythmic pulse of a hide drum. A man sang, his voice clear and strong, a song of the water, of the earth renewed. Further down, near the patch of green grass where the settlers had gathered, a vaquero from the ranch to the south played a slow, sweet melody on a Mexican guitar. The two threads of music, one of a deep drum beat, one of light strings, did not clash. They wove together on the evening breeze, a sound that was hesitant and new. The air smelled of juniper smoke, of Rosa Alvarez's rich chili stew simmering in a large iron pot, and of the sweet, hot oil of fry bread that the ND women cooked over open fires. Eliza Hart stood near the edge of the water. She wore a dress of plain, sturdy gray homespun. She had sewn it herself, in her new shop, the stitches small, neat, and strong. It was clean. It was hers. On her wrist, the small knot of blue thread Gray Dove had given her was a circle of bright, defiant color. She was watching Coanez. He stood speaking with Gray Dove, the elder's face calm in the firelight. He wore his buckskins, simple and practical, but on his hip, fastened to his belt, was the heavy knife, the one with the family mark carved into the horn handle. He wore it not as a weapon, but as a badge of his identity, his honor restored, his place secured. He was the guardian of the spring, the guardian of the trail. Rosa moved through the quiet crowd, handing out tin cups of strong, black coffee. She gave one to Eliza, then one to Koa as he joined her by the water. The music paused. The drumming stopped. A hush fell over the small valley, a natural pause in the celebration. Everyone turned, settlers and ND, looking at the two of them. It was not planned. It was a moment that simply arrived, a question hanging in the quiet air. Koa did not look at the crowd. He looked at Eliza. He looked at the woman who had climbed a water tower in the dark, who had faced down Cole Maddox, who had held the truth on plates of glass. His voice was not loud, but in the silence of the canyon, it carried, clear and certain. He spoke the words he had first said in the dark, in the terror of the storm. "You are my treasure." Eliza felt the warmth of the coffee cup in her hands. She felt the eyes of the entire, blended community upon her. She was not the plain, overlooked mender of mail sacks, hiding in the corner of the saloon. She was Eliza Hart. She was the keeper of the blue thread. She was the one who held his knife. She met his gaze, and her smile was steady. "Sure. I'm not fancy," she said, her voice clear, her words for him, and for everyone. "But I'm yours." The next day, they hung the photograph. It was the largest, most difficult print she had ever made. Koa had built the frame from the smooth, cured wood of a cottonwood tree. It took Amos Pike and Naichi, working together, to hoist it into place. They hung it on the main wall of La Paloma, the cantina of Rosa Alvarez, the heart of the town. It took the place of the last torn remnants of the wanted posters. The photograph was of the Arroyo Bridge. It was not the smoking, splintered ruin from the ambush. It was the new bridge, rebuilt with sturdy timbers from the railroad's frozen assets, put together by the hands of settlers and ND, working side by side. And on the bridge, the sunlight had been captured, frozen in silver. Elsie, the sister of Rosa, was in the center, running. Her hand was held tightly by a small ND boy. They were both laughing, their feet blurred with motion, two children crossing a divide that no longer existed. Eliza stood back, looking at the image. She knew, with a certainty that settled in her bones, that justice had not come from the most powerful gun. It had not come from the rifle Koa had fired from the roof, or the revolver Amos had bravely drawn. Justice had come from the quiet, stubborn truth, held up, exposed, and forced into the light. It had come from the hard, patient compassion of Grey Dove and the fierce loyalty of Rosa. It had come from the moment Koa chose justice over vengeance. The future was not a story that was finished. The West was not a paradise. The iron rails of the railroad would still come. She could hear the distant sound of hammering from the new route, far to the south, bypassing the sacred valley. The dry seasons would return. The sun would be a hammer, and the land would be harsh. Life would be hard. But this time, it was different. There was a compact, a piece of paper signed by both communities and filed with the territorial governor, protecting the water of the spring. And there was something stronger than paper. There was trust. It was fragile, like a new glass plate, but it was there. That evening, Eliza sat in her small shop. The sign, treasure and thread, moved softly in the breeze. The last light of the day fell across the open page of her journal. She dipped her pen in the ink, her hand no longer stained, but clean. She looked out her small window, toward the darkening mesas. She could just see the faint spark of a campfire, high on the ridge, where Koa watched the trail. She wrote the last line. People called him a shadow. She wrote, I call him home. She closed the book. The sky outside was a deep, velvet purple. The first insects of the night began their sharp, clean song. A cool wind moved through the tall reeds by the creek, a sound like a long, slow breath. The high desert was still wild, a land of stone and promise, but in the small adobe shop and in the quiet wiki-ups by the spring, their hearts were at peace. Thank you for listening to this story, and I invite you to share where you are listening from in the comments so we can all connect. Subscribe to my channel, Wild West Tales, like the video, and press the hype button to help this story reach more listeners.